Hey there, it's Luis Miranda for LC Design. Today we're going to look at how to make this Hogwarts robe inside of Marvelous Designer. We're going to use real sewing patterns that you would use on an actual sewing machine, but we're going to use it inside of the software by tracing the shapes and then sewing them together digitally. On top of that, I'm also going to show you how to prepare your file so that you can bring it into Substance Painter. I've also included a download link down in the description, which comes with a folder with lots of little goodies such as a pre-animated 3D model of a person, the sewing pattern, and also a couple of materials that you can use to create your Hogwarts patches. Okay, so get your wands ready and let's go learn the dark art of Marvelous Designer. Okay, so once you download the tutorial files, you will be presented with these two objects. One is the collada file, which we'll be using as our character, and also it is pre-animated, so it's a little easier for you guys to follow along, and also a robe pattern, which I will be using to base our fabrics on. Just want to let you know that the collada is a female model, and if you want to create your own character, I credit this inside of Daz 3D. So if you want to create it, download this, it'll let you make pretty much any character you want. It has a lot of really cool features. I'm not going to demo it because there's a lot of nudity involved and I don't want to get demonetized. So go ahead and just play around with that if you want to create your own model, or else just go ahead and use the one I included. If you want to maybe use like a Mixamo model, I can show you really quickly how to set it up. So here's a walk cycle. So I would recommend downloading whatever you want to do, but then also download a T-pose. And so then you have these two. It's really important that you blend between positions. So let's go ahead and hop into Cinema so I can show you how to set this up really quickly. It is actually really easy to do. So let's go ahead and merge our first object, which is going to be our walking pose. So here we go. Let's go ahead and no, and it actually changes your takes. So make sure that you have it set on main. Otherwise you're going to have a little bit of issues. So now what you want to do is go ahead and create a null and drop all of them into here. And I'm just going to rename it to walk cycle. Now let's go ahead and import the T-pose. Same thing. And no. Make sure your takes are still okay. We're good. So now you have these two guys. Same thing. Go ahead and create another null and drop in those characters. So now let's go ahead and call this T-pose. Cool. So first thing that I'm gonna do is use the walk cycle. Go over here to animate, and then we're gonna do add motion clip. And here it'll just copy everything. Press OK. It'll go ahead and create, and you'll see these 3 bars over here. So if you go over here to your F-curve editor and find this area, this is your dope sheet, this is your F-curves, and here's your motion clip. And so all the data is saved in this clip right here. Let's go ahead and do the same for the T-pose. Go over here, add motion clip, all of them, and good. And so now we'll see a second one up here. So everything is kind of being driven by this guy right here. So let's go ahead and move that over. I'm going to delete this T-pose and then bring this one from the left side over into here. And so now you see this like really small file. Let's go ahead and extend it by a bit. And then if you notice, it kind of hops between the two. So let me go ahead and hide the T-pose on our object manager. And then once you slide this over, it'll actually create like a transition. So let's go ahead and keep pushing it over until we get to like frame 1. And so now you have like this nice little gentle transition. What I want to do though is bring this up to like 60 or so. And so now we're going to bring in the walk cycle one more time. So it kind of had a little bit of a stutter there. Let's go ahead and watch it again. Yeah, so you can make this as long as you want. I'm just going to leave it here at 43. Let's go ahead and cut it. Cool. So now you have a pretty good walk cycle that transitions from your T-pose. And the way you get this into Marvelous is by going to export, and then you do an alembic. Unfortunately, if you try doing a collada or something like that, it just won't translate over correctly. So what you definitely want to do is a limbic. So let's go ahead and put this at 43 frames. And let's take off splines and curves and all that good stuff. We're just going to leave almost everything the same. Let's go ahead and press OK. And then let's save it here. I already have one pre-saved. And let's hop on over to Marvelous. So once we hop over to Marvelous, let's go ahead and go to Import. And then over here, we're going to do a limbic. And we're going to grab that walking limbic file. And so then here it'll ask you a couple of questions. And let's go ahead and make sure that the scale, so Cinema 4D works in centimeters. So we're going to go ahead and put that in centimeters. Press OK. So now you have your file. And then if you go over here to animation, you should see these red bars. And you can now watch it. And it's animated. And what's really nice is that it transitions really gently. And so this is going to be very helpful for once we start animating the robe and having it fit to the final pose. Okay, so that's a very quick tutorial on how to set up an FBX sequence from Mixamo to work with Marvelous. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the avatar. And let's bring in the one that I included. And this one's an open collada. So let's go ahead and go there. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our open collada file. And here, make sure you select auto scale. All right, so now we have ourselves a female character. And if we go inside of our animation, you'll see that she has her animation in there. So what's really nice is that, it transitions very gently into that pose. Cool. All right, we're going to work with her in the T-pose. All right, so next thing we want to do is bring in the pattern. So let's go ahead and right-click inside of the 2D view. And let's go here to add background image. And so here you click on this little folder. Okay, and then you go into the folder that I included and select this robe pattern. All right, so here we're going to have to do a little bit of scaling. Let's do something like 500 maybe. That's still a little too big. Let's go ahead and bring this down maybe like 300. It's good to, maybe place it right here so that you can see. You want this to go down to like her ankles. So let's see, 350. A little bit more. Let's do a 360 or 375. Yeah, so here's about the size we want. Okay, so let's go ahead and just place it on this little line down the middle so it's a little bit easier for us to draw. Cool, and it's a little off. Okay, let's press OK. And so now this is when we start tracing the object. So right off the bat, I'm going to let you know that we're going to avoid a couple of these patterns. The ones we need are these two right here, the sleeves and also the hood. These parts right here are actually are a little bit like they make more sense if you were to do this in real life. However, because we're doing this digitally, this is just going to add a headache. So I'm going to just avoid these two right here. So just ignore them. Let's focus on these guys right here. Okay, so let's zoom in. Click on this guy right here, which is our polygon creation tool. And all right, so let's go ahead and just trace this guy out and try to keep it in as few points as possible. And also don't worry about these curves until after we have drawn the shape. So then you click on that, then bring it over to this corner and bring it here, and we're good. So you'll see that it appears over here, and it's a little flimsy, it looks a little polygonal. So let's go ahead and click on our fabric, which is automatically created. Since I can't really see through it, we're just gonna tone down the opacity just a bit so that we can see it over here. Cool. So now to make these curves, what you want to do is select this object right here, which is your curve editor. And so, yeah, you just click in and then you pull down and Depending on where you're holding it, it kind of creates a nice little curve. And if you want to get a little bit more, precise, familiarize yourself with these two buttons. A is for your for your pattern. So if you hit Z, it gives you access to these handles, and so now you can get a lot more precise with your shapes. Cool. So yeah, we're right there. Now let's go ahead and do the same over here. Let's switch over to this tool, which is your edit curvature, which is C. Let's go ahead and bring this guy down. This one shouldn't be too hard. Cool. I'm not really going to need to focus too much on all this other stuff. I think it'll be fine. Cool. So now let's go ahead and do the back part of the robe. Let's go ahead and select our polygon creation tool. Same thing. Let's go ahead and click that and that. All right. So now we have this part. Let's go ahead and fix our curves. Hit Z. This guy needs to be a little taller. And this guy needs, oops. Yeah, and if you want to isolate which one you're touching, just go ahead and drag a little rectangle over it, and then you'll just modify that one. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and go to C so we can bring this guy down. This one has a little bit of a different curve here, so you have it kind of, it's almost flat right here. So let's go ahead and switch over to Z. Let's see if we can do that without having to add another point. Yeah, so yeah, basically if you make it perpendicular, you should be able to make that shape. Awesome. Okay, and so let's go ahead and switch over to our C tool and bring this guy down. All right. Okay, so now we have our two main elements created, as you can see them over here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make the sleeve. Let's go ahead and select our polygon shape. And here, let's go ahead and use this line in the middle. And so what we're going to do, we're going to see if we can make this shape using just the curves. If you're familiar with Illustrator, this should be pretty familiar territory for you. And let's go ahead and click it. All right, so here, let's go ahead and add some curve to it. It's just try to match that top part. And let's go ahead and just match one of these curvatures. All right. All right, switch over to your pattern. I like the little curve tool. Let's go ahead and select this guy. And let's bring it over. And the way to get nice little S curves is just basically by adding a lot of tension. And so the longer you make it, the more tension it gets. So if I were to bring this like super far away and then bring this guy over here, it gives you like a nice sort of sharp S. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get it nice and clean here. And we're getting pretty close. Let's see, maybe bring this guy down just a tiny bit. It doesn't have to be completely exact. Remember, these are for like a real life thing. We can get away with a few things that you wouldn't normally in a real life setting, so don't worry too much about getting it too precise. And so here, same thing. Let's go ahead and just bring it out. So you got that nice little curve going. Cool. And let's bring this guy out and bring this guy in. Wonderful. All right, so that should be it right there for that guy. Let's go ahead and work on our final part, which is the robe. The hood. Let's go ahead and do this straight line since it's already here. All right, so here there's kind of like this flat part, and then it goes up. I'm just gonna skip it. Same thing here. There's kind of like this weird dip. I'm just gonna skip it as well. Cool. Let's go ahead and add the curvature. All right. And let's go ahead and add some more curvature here. And we're gonna need to do a little bit of finessing with our handles. We want to get this line as close as possible, but it's okay if it terminates here. So you lose a little bit, but it's okay. Let's get it nice and fitted. Cool. All right, so now we have all of our pieces that we need. Let's go ahead and hit A, and I'm going to go ahead and hide the background image. Let's go ahead and put the opacity at 0, and we're good. So it's still back there in case we need it, but we probably won't. So each one of these parts it has to be basically duplicated. So let's go ahead and start positioning some of these things. I'm going to go ahead and put this down here and this guy over here. Since this goes over by the head, this one's fine. Cool. So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and right click on this guy, and we're going to go here to symmetric pattern. So now you can basically place it right here. And I selected symmetric pattern with sewing, and this is going to be very important later. It helps you it helps minimize the amount of work you have to do. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of the same steps over and over. So let's go ahead and do that for the sleeve as well. Let's place it over here. Let's do it for the hood. Let's do symmetric pattern. Let's place it over here. The same thing for the back. Symmetric pattern. Cool. All right, so we got all of our parts. Let's go ahead and select these two guys. All right, so what we want to do is rotate these two to the back. And if this is the first time you've ever opened Marvelous Designer or haven't really played around with the preferences, make sure you go over here to your top and here in Gizmo, and normally it's set to screen coordinates. Set them to local coordinates. That way it's a little easier to manipulate in 3D space. So let's go ahead and select these, and let's go ahead and rotate and then push them back. And if you notice, depending on which angle you look at, you'll see a dark side and a bright side. And the dark side just means that that's the back side of the normal, which is really important for like visualizing it inside of 3D programs. Stuff like Cinema 4D is really good at showing both sides of the polygon, but certain programs such as Substance will not show the back side of it. Okay, so now that we got these guys, let's get them really close, like let's kind of cover her butt a little bit, and let's go ahead and grab the front. Let's push these in. Maybe lift them up a little bit. Okay, so on the sleeve, let's go ahead and bring it sideways. This one's fun because you kind of have to drape it over. And yeah, let's get it as close as we can. And the reason I get them close is so that when we drape them, they don't pull on the other fabric as much. As you wanted to give them as little bit of motion as possible so that they don't interrupt anything else. All right, let's go ahead and do the same for this guy. Okay, and now let's go ahead and do that for the hood. So the hood basically comes in this way. So we'll kind of just place it around in a general vicinity of her head. Go and rotate. Okay, so now that we have everything placed, let's go ahead and start sewing some stuff. It's very simple. Let's go ahead and select this guy right here, which will allow us to connect segments together. So the back parts, let's go ahead and just sew them. You'll see these two lines come in. And then what we'll want to do for the front as well, even though the front is open, for right now, we're going to keep it nice and connected in the front. So now what we want to do is here is connect across, and so it kind of has a diagonal sort of sewing pattern, which is fine. And let's go, yeah, and so see how it automatically did it for you. You don't have to do anything else. So I'm not going to put on the sleeves just yet. So what we want to do, cool, so now let's go ahead and select these elements. We're going to right click and then hit freeze. And so now these guys are going to be separated from any sort of simulation. So to simulate, we're just going to go ahead. Actually, I'm missing a little bit of a sewing pattern over here. So let's go ahead and sew that together really quickly. And so here what we want to do is not sew this part, but necessarily this part. And we'll connect it to the shoulder. Cool. So now it'll duplicate. Cool. So to simulate, all you have to do is hit the space bar. So now everything kind of comes in really nicely. Let's go ahead and change our fabric and give it some opacity again. And it's a little hard to see because, you know, she's white and so is the fabric. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit more like the Hogwarts robe. And it's kind of a little bit of a dark. Let's not make it completely black so that we can kind of see some of the details. Okay, so this is our first step into making our robe. Cool. So now let's stop the simulation. Now we're going to work on these sleeves. Let's go ahead and select our sewing. And what we want to do is connect this half. Thankfully, it's already set up. And so you just connect it to the sleeve area. Let's go ahead and do it on the back side. So yeah, you select the other half of it, and now you put the other half on the other piece. So the back piece of the robe. Cool. So before we hit simulate, let's make sure we unfreeze them. Let's go ahead and select them, right click, and then unfreeze. So now let's go ahead and drape them. And so they get nice, drop nice, and see how this guy is kind of like all over the place. And that's because he kind of got pulled from like really far away. So if you kind of just hang on to it just by clicking and dragging, make sure it's on A so you can actually interact with it like this. Cool. All right, so let's not worry too much about these fingers. All right, let's not focus too much on these fingers poking through. We can fix that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and do some more sewing. What you want to do is sew this part to this part. And it should be mirrored. So now you got that. Cool. So now it sews up really nicely. Cool. All right. So now we just need to do the hood, and we are very close to getting our base shape down. Okay. So what we want to do on this guy, this part's going to be a little tricky because we have to connect two very different parts. We have to connect the neck area, but then we have to connect this back neck area. And these ones are easy to sew in that, like if these were just one big segment, it would be easy. But because they're separated and this guy is not, we're going to have to use a different tool, which is this guy right here, which is the free sewing. So what we want to do is go ahead and select it from the bottom, bring it up. Let me see. Okay. And then we want to select this guy from here, and then see how it creates that little dot right here? This is telling us that this is where the same length as this guy. So let's go ahead and just click on that. And so now it creates a nice little area to sew up to this point. And now what we can do is select this point to this point and do it for the back area. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you have this weird crisscrossing, it means that you sewed across. So let's go ahead and undo that. Cool. So now we have both segments ready to sew. And before we go, we need to make sure that these two parts of the hood are sewed as well. And the top part as well. Cool. And before we do that, let's go ahead and switch over to our select tool with A and unfreeze. Cool. So now let's go ahead and drop it. And so now we got this really nice little hood. Most of the kids at Hogwarts don't actually wear the hood over their heads. It's always kind of draped behind their back. So let's go ahead and just pull this guy back and see if we can get like a nice drape on it. The thing that's very iconic about these robes is that they are very much about showing off your house affiliation. So you want to have this part open right here so that people can see which house you are. So let's kind of play around with that. And also when you're walking, you want to have people see behind which house you are. Cool. Let's go ahead and kind of fix this part a tiny bit. Let's kind of pull that over. Awesome. Cool. So this is basically our base shape. We can finesse a few things. We don't really need to do anything too crazy. We just need to fix these fingers. Let's go ahead and let's pull it up. Okay, so now we got that. Let's let it kind of unfurl itself. You can like play with it, kind of give it, but we don't really have to worry about that right now because honestly, once we simulate it, a lot of these things will kind of fix themselves. So when we look at these Harry Potter robes, what are we missing? It's the inside. So how do we make that? All right, let's go ahead and take care of it. It's actually a very simple process. It's pretty amazing. So since the hood is very obvious and exposed, let's go ahead and just do that. So what you want to do, let me just just for my own sake, I'm going to put these together. What we're going to do is going to select both, right click, and then we're going to do this one, layer clone, and we're going to do it under. So it basically creates a whole nother clone, and it's pretty much this exact same shape. You didn't really see it. It kind of popped in a little bit, but it's a lot easier to see if we go ahead and create a new fabric. I'm going to go ahead and name this one just robe, and we're going to copy it, and let's go ahead and call this inner lining, or we can actually more accurately, let's call it house lining. Cool. So here we're going to go ahead and select a new color. So I don't know about you guys, but I identify as a Slytherin. Let's go ahead and select Slytherin, or if you want to do whatever house you're actually in. So if you've done your Pottermore and you know that you're a Hufflepuff and there's no way that you're going to do a Slytherin, I'm putting up the colors for each of the houses so that you can just choose whichever you want. But yeah, I'm going to go with Slytherin because they're cooler than everybody. Okay, so let's go ahead and select that and change our fabric to house lining. And so now you can kind of see it. So if you let it simulate, it'll kind of figure itself out and kind of start pushing some of the shapes around. Okay, so if you notice, it's still really hard to see. It's kind of like, it's like dark, and that's because the normals are flipped. So let's go ahead and right click on those and let's do a flip normal. And so now they're a lot more bright. Let's go ahead and hit simulate so that they can kind of fix all these weird little areas. Got some stuff here in the back. It's kind of figuring itself out. You might need to give it a little bit of a hand. We don't have to get it perfect just yet, because later on, once we increase the particle or lower the particle distance, things will get a lot more detailed, and it'll be a little taxing on your system, but it won't be too bad. Okay, so now what we want to do is also for the inside, because you also see it in there, especially when they're kind of pointing their wands and stuff. So let's go ahead and select the insides of here. Let's go ahead and right click and let's do a layer under. Let's go ahead and duplicate those. You'll see kind of like a little bit of a pop in. Now let's go ahead and select both. And let's go ahead and select your house lining. And so now Again, they're kind of dark, so let's make sure we and flip normal. Cool. So let's go ahead and simulate this guy. Things are sort of figuring themselves out, which is nice. The program is pretty smart in certain ways. It knows to kind of push certain elements out, but sometimes it does need a little bit of help, but let's not worry too much about it just yet. And you can also do this for the inside of the robe by duplicating. And yeah, so let's kind of look at our reference again. So if we look at here, let's see, one with an open robe. Well, there's this one. See how you can see the inside? And that's what that original shape was for, the one that we ignored. Let's go ahead and let's kind of increase the opacity on this guy to 100. That's what this is for. But I don't see how it's like one big piece, and it would have to go on here, but then also inside of this. That's just too much for me, honestly. So what we're going to do is just duplicate the front. Actually, I'm going to do both sides just in case, you know, you ever see behind. So let's go ahead and select all of them, right click, and we're going to do a clone layer under. And while they're still selected, let's go ahead and choose house lighting. And while we also still have them selected, let's go ahead and flip normals. Cool. So now let's go ahead and simulate this so that they can kind of separate themselves and try to look pretty. Okay, so now that it's done simulating, now you got pretty much your robe ready to go. So we still have this front part still pretty much sewed together. So let's go ahead and adjust this. Let's go ahead and go into our sew select, and let's go ahead and select this guy. And I think it's this guy. Let's go ahead and delete it. Okay, so now there shouldn't be any sewing here. However, we still want some sewing, so let's go ahead and do the custom sew area. Now let's do like a 5, I think this is centimeter or inch. And then over on this side, let's do the same thing. And it automatically snaps you to the equal length. So now, so see how they're separating, but still tied right there. Normally there's a button, but I don't really want to go through and add like a whole button, especially since we can just do that. And since the pose is going to be kind of an action pose, you're not really going to notice it. I'm going to make it look like there's like wind and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so I think it's a good time to use our animation that we have included and have this guy look a little bit more interesting. So let's go over here to our animation. And so if you just press play, you'll notice that the character kind of just moves on its own. So what you want to do is actually hit this red button over here. And it'll actually record all the points and follow the motion. So let's go ahead and hit this button. This might take a little bit depending on your machine. So let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, so now that it's simulated, we can see it move. Cool. See how it just looks so cool, how it just moves. You can actually leave it animating for a while if you want, but we kind of just want it here. And so, yeah, her hand kind of grabbed it. So what we'll do is kind of just do a little bit more finessing so we can kind of get more action shots like this. Let's go back to our simulation and let's go ahead and start simulating. Let me actually minimize this guy so we can focus more on this, since pretty much this is all done. We don't really have to worry too much about this. Now it's more about posing. All right, so let's go ahead. So it's kind of adjusting itself with the new pose. Let's go ahead and bring this back. just kind of, this part is a little tricky. You kind of have to be a little careful with it because it can take up a lot of time. So if you want to focus on specific areas, go ahead and select everything. So if you select everything, right click and freeze, we can then play around with just the sleeves and not have to worry about all this other stuff getting calculated. The issue though is that this is like hard as a rock, so we're not going to be able to kind of finesse it until after we're done playing with this part. But it's really important that we get this part looking really nice because, you know, when you're casting your spell against the Dark Lord, you don't want this covering your hand, you know, you want it out the way. Okay, so now we got this nice little pose, because this is kind of going to be like our camera angle right here. She's going to be holding, you know, a nice little serious black wand and, you know, shooting a little spell. All right, I'm going to make it look like wind's going this way. So I'm going to freeze it at a very opportune time. Okay, so let's go ahead and select everything. And let's go ahead and unfreeze. So if it doesn't appear for you here, it always kind of changes based on the context. But if you're on the 3D side, it should appear up here. But if you're on the 2D side, it'll appear down here. So let's go ahead and unfreeze. Let's try to have a little bit of fun with this. So now everything's simulating. So if you're having issues with your simulation, let's go ahead and select all of them. In here, inside of your particle distance, let's go ahead and just increase it. I'm going to put it to like 50. It's going to make it really low res. The mesh in particular, it's going to be kind of, but it'll calculate a lot faster. See? And so then now you can like bring this over here and kind of play with this. You can do something more like that. Obviously, your character should probably be wearing pants. Another thing you can do is if you want it to be kind of up here, you can freeze it, and then you already have a point selected. And so up here you can select this pin box. And so you can do a box or a lasso. I'm going to use a lasso, and so you can select that, and then it'll stay up. And so now with some more simulation going, you can, you know, bring up another part, pause it, and then go back to it. Cool. So now let's keep playing around with it. Let's find, like, you know, maybe something like this. So it looks like the wind is blowing it up. Cool. Yeah, so select our pin. Let's go ahead and select this one again. Yeah. So if we want to keep doing this for more parts, I think having this over here. Okay. Sweet. So it looks a little bit more action-y. Okay, so yeah, so feel free to pose it however you want. You know, if you're doing a walk cycle, you probably won't do this part because you'll probably be focused more on the animation side of it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's lower our particle distance again. We were at 20 originally, let's do 10. This way we can get it as detailed as possible. It adds a lot more wrinkles and all that good stuff. This is going to take a little bit of time depending on your machine, because it uses your GPU, I believe. And so if you have, you know, maybe an older card, it might take a little bit longer. But if you have like all the new and the latest and greatest, this should be pretty good. All right. All right. Cool. So now we have our cool little action pose. And this is pretty much everything you would need to create yourself a little character. All right, so before we do anything, let's go ahead and set this guy up so that we can paint it inside the Substance Painter. This part's not 100% required, but if you want to take it into Substance and, you know, detail the robe, you know, kind of add some nice like fabric details instead of it just being kind of a wrinkly sort of mesh. Here's kind of how you have to set it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and over here to our instead of simulation, we're going to do UV editor. Okay, so here is basically our giant canvas for UVs. Basically, we can try doing stuff like it's called UDEM, which lets you use multiple of these, but I'm just going to set it up for one. Depending on your software, you can or cannot access these extra tiles, such as like Cinema 4D will not let you access these, but it won't let you access them in a very easy way. You basically have to do a couple of adjustments inside of the UV editor, but I kind of just want to go straight into Substance Painter. So I'm just going to go ahead and set it up inside of one tile. Okay, so basically this part's I would say maybe the most manual part of creating these fabrics, because there isn't really a pack UV function for this, so you kind of just have to do it on your own. But essentially the trick to making good UVs is to try to keep them as much as in a square as possible. So just imagine you're working inside of this square, and then what we can do is right click inside of the UV, just nothing selected, and go ahead and set fit UV to unified 0 to 1. Cool. So then it'll push it all inside of here, and we can see what we can do. I try to keep these as close to the original size as possible. There's a concept called textile density. What you want is for them to be as evenly distributed as possible, even if it means certain parts are small. But yeah, it makes it a lot easier for painting because all the textures will look a lot more cohesive. There won't be parts where it's like hyper res and then there's a part where it's super low res. Yeah, so let's go ahead and keep adjusting these and try to optimize as much of this space as possible. And so let's see, let's go ahead and select them all. Let's go ahead and expand it. I usually do this until one of the edges touches the boundary. Cool. I think we can probably afford to move things a little bit more. I try to keep them all also aligned. I don't want them to be all flipped in all sorts of weird ways. But if you notice, there's kind of this gap here. So let's go ahead and select these guys down here. Let's bring them up until we touch. We could probably move these guys a little bit lower so that they're kind of close to that UV. You could also stack these guys like so. Let's see, where else can we, because we're not going to be able to expand it unless we move these guys somehow. Also, see how these guys are sort of flipped. Let's go ahead and just bring them like this so that they can be as clean as possible. Okay. Same thing here. Let's go ahead and just bring it over. All right. Let's see, we can probably move this guy over here and this guy over here. We should be able to get some extra pixels out of this. I'm gonna move this guy a little bit. I think I could probably move this guy over here. Yep. Okay, so there we go. Just try to find the most efficient use of this single tile, and it'll be really good to go for once we export this guy. Okay, so let's go back to our simulation, and we're pretty much good to go. Let's I'll just kind of show you the process to send this over to Substance. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and select all these guys. I'm not gonna bring the cumin over because it'll bring it in all sorts of weird shapes and sizes. So what we're gonna do is just go ahead and export, and we're gonna do OBJ selected. You can also do an alembic if you want to have like the whole motion of it. That's better for for the walk cycle. For this, I'm just going to do a still because I kind of want to do more like I'm pretending I'm making a poster or something, you know, or like a statue. So let's go ahead and OBJ selected. All right, I'm just going to save it into that folder that I included with this file. I'm going to call this Hogwarts Robe fabric. Something, I don't know, something descriptive. And let's go ahead and hit save. Here is where we can decide if we want to have this be a unified, like a single object, or if we want it to be multiple objects. The multiple object approach is good for if you want to do a sort of like individual sort of fine tuning and stuff. But I think I'm just going to keep it as single, and let's keep it as centimeters. It doesn't really matter like all this stuff because we can adjust it later, but let's go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so now that it's exported, let's go ahead and open up Substance Painter. So let's go ahead and find our Hogwarts Robe fabric, and let's go ahead and drop it inside of here. So it'll give us this. Let's go ahead. So you can do like UDIMs here, and it'll kind of create a texture set, but I just wanted to keep it on that one. So it's simple. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And so now we have ourselves our robe. You can bring the human if you would like, but I think working on the robe on its own is pretty good. And so if you notice, it splits the UVs based on which material was on inside of Marvelous. So all the green stuff goes into its own material, and all the black stuff goes into its own. And this way it's a little easier to manage, although having it all in a single tile would be fine as well, because then that means you have to deal with less textures, but it is what it is. Let's go ahead and find ourselves a fabric. You know, and here is kind of where you can start having fun with it. If you just drop it in, like onto the object, it looks kind of weird, but you know, you can start scaling it down. You know, it's important to not have too much repetition. And here we can drop the colors. You know, we can bring it down just a tiny bit. And so now let's go ahead and let's find something cool for the inside. Oops. Let's see. Let's grab this for the inside. And so it kind of has like a nice little pattern to it. Let's go ahead and scale it down. Let's do -10. And also, I haven't adjusted the resolution of this texture, so if we were to come in really close and bring this up to 4K, you see it all bake down again, and you can see all the little details a little bit better. So let's go ahead and keep scaling it down so we can kind of have, so it's a little bit more of a texture rather than like a focal point. Same thing with our black robe. Let's go ahead and play with this a little bit. So rotate it. But anyways, and also we need to fix the color, because honestly, who's Ravenclaw? Seriously. Boom. Okay, so I've included these 4 folders that have patches inside of the download folder. So when you open it, you'll see, you'll see your AO, you'll see your base color, your height, all that good stuff, and especially this opacity. This is the important part. And so what you want to do is bring these into your render. You know, if you're using Octane or Redshift, these are very simple. If you're using the standard shader, you'll want to play around with the displacement of your material. So if you want to see how they're going to look, this is kind of some examples to show you. So this is the Slytherin. So you can see there's a lot of really nice details to everything, and yeah, the shape is actually being driven by the alpha. It's not necessarily an actual piece of fabric that I cut inside of Marvelous. And same thing here with the Ravenclaw. You can see it, and it matches the shape. And so the way I'm able to project this image onto the fabric as its own element, I'm going to show you here in Cinema. So I have this sphere and also this plane. So I put the plane inside of a cloth surface, and I also have a shrink wrap. And let's go ahead and activate. So inside your shrink wrap, make sure you put your target as your sphere. Normally it comes in along normals. So let's go ahead and activate it. And you see that it kind of just like shoots it over based on the normal. And it kind of also stretches it, makes it look kind of weird. So what you want to do instead is if you go here to target axis, so it kind of keeps it a little bit more of its it kind of makes it a little bit more proportional. But yeah, you can always play around with it and cover as much as you want. And so let's say we have like a displacer to kind of recreate the sort of waviness of the fabric. Let's go ahead and deactivate the shrink wrap and then reactivate it, and it matches the shape a little bit better. So if you're having issues where maybe it looks a little bit like this and you kind of have like a mismatch, you want to maybe add double the amount of polygons to this plane compared to the source object, specifically that area. Don't because when it comes out of Marvelous, it does have like millions of polygons, so you don't want to crank this up to 1 million, but that area that it's affecting might have 200 polygons, so you can increase those until it matches pretty well. And so it can get a little dense, but depending on what you're doing, this might be fine. And also inside of Substance, you can actually paint it in there as well by bringing in those objects and then scaling them and all that good stuff and just placing it on the texture. But I always like to kind of separate it, especially if I'm going to be doing several of these different objects. So if I wanted to swap out like some textures, but then just swap out this guy, and so I can create a lot of different variation, it's a lot easier. So yeah, so hopefully these are helpful to you, and I really hope you guys play around with these. I think these are really cool little textures. I actually found a patch generator online, and I just dropped in a vector file, and it actually generates all this stuff procedurally. It's really cool. That's the power of Substance, I guess. And like that, we got ourselves a Hogwarts Robe. So hopefully you guys will play around with this, texture it even more, maybe even do an animation. And there we go. That's pretty much the entire tutorial. All right, let's head back to my face. And just like that, mischief has been managed. I really hope that this has opened your eyes to the possibilities of Marvelous Designer. And I really hope that you apply what you have learned today to future projects. If you liked what you saw, I really appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps me out. I'm very close to hitting the 1,000 mark, and I really hope that the tutorials that I've been producing have been helping you guys along. I know that you guys have been really enjoying the X Particles tutorial, and so don't worry about that. I will be making another one pretty soon. So with that being said, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.